The crystalline spires of the Aetherian capital gleamed like frozen starlight against the purple sky. Inside the grand reception hall, Princess Lyra stood motionless, her iridescent scales dulled by the weight of what was to come. The human delegation would arrive any moment, and with them, her fate would be sealed. Emperor Varian, her father, sat upon his living throne of symbiotic crystal, each facet pulsing with barely contained energy. His expression remained impassive, but Lyra could feel his disgust radiating through their species' empathic connection. She was a failure in his eyes, the first Aetherian royal in 10 generations, born without the ability to merge with the sacred crystal matrices that powered their civilization. The grand doors swung open, admitting the human diplomatic team. Commander James Hayes led them, his dark uniform a stark contrast to the ethereal architecture surrounding them. His eyes, a deep brown that reminded Lyra of the rich soil on agricultural worlds, scanned the room with military precision before settling on her. Emperor Varian, Hayes bowed slightly, maintaining perfect diplomatic protocol. The United Earth Federation is honored by your invitation. The Emperor's voice resonated through the chamber, each word carrying crystalline undertones. Commander Hayes, we have considered your proposal for a military alliance against the swarm incursions. However, we offer something more valuable. Lyra felt her heart constrict. This was it. My daughter, Princess Lyra, will be given to humanity as a gesture of our commitment to lasting peace. The Emperor's words fell like shards of ice. She is yours to do with as you please. Hayes' expression darkened. With all due respect, Emperor, we came to discuss military cooperation, not to acquire persons. You refuse our gift. The Emperor's voice carried a dangerous edge. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. Commander Hayes, I go willingly. It wasn't true, but it was necessary. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant playing the game. Hayes studied her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the diplomat warring with the soldier, the human warring with duty. Finally, he spoke. We accept your generous gift, Emperor Varian. The words sealed Lyra's fate, but strangely, she felt no despair. Instead, as she walked toward the human delegation, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The journey to Hayes' ship, the UES Horizon, passed in a blur. Lyra was given quarters that, while sparse by Aetherian standards, offered more warmth than her father's palace ever had. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the simple cotton sheets, marveling at their organic texture. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Enter, she called, straightening her posture out of habit. Hayes stepped in, having shed his formal diplomatic attire for a standard uniform. Princess Lyra, I wanted to check on you personally. Just Lyra, please, she said softly. I'm not a princess anymore. You're not property either, Hayes countered, his voice firm. Whatever your father intended on this ship, you're under my protection as a person, not a possession. Lyra's bioluminescent markings flickered in surprise. You don't understand, Commander. I'm defective. I cannot merge with the crystal matrices. I cannot bear children. I have no value to my people. Value isn't determined by what you can't do, Hayes said, pulling up a chair. It's determined by who you are, and from what I've seen so far, you're someone who managed to maintain dignity in an impossible situation. That says more about your worth than any ability to merge with crystals. His words struck something deep within her, a chord that had long gone unplayed. In the Aetherian Empire, worth was measured in utility, in what one could contribute to the greater whole. The concept of inherent value was alien to her people. Why did you accept me? She asked suddenly. You could have refused. Diplomatic consequences be damned. Hayes ran a hand through his short, dark hair. Because I saw the look in your eyes. It wasn't defeat I saw there, it was survival. And if there's one thing humans understand, it's the drive to survive against all odds. A small smile tugged at Lyra's lips, causing her markings to glow faintly. "You're very different from what I expected, Commander Hayes." "James," he corrected, "and humans are generally different from what people expect. It's kind of our thing." For the first time in years, Lyra felt herself truly smile. Perhaps being given to humanity wasn't an ending after all. Perhaps it was just the beginning. 3 weeks aboard the UES Horizon had taught Lyra more about humanity than all her years of diplomatic training. They were chaotic, loud, and perpetually in motion. Everything the Aetherians weren't. Yet beneath their seeming disorder lay a fascinating complexity that drew her in. Dr. Sarah Chen, the ship's chief medical officer, had become particularly intriguing to Lyra. The doctor's persistent curiosity about Aetherian biology was both unnerving and refreshing. Unlike the cold, clinical approaches of Aetherian physicians, Dr. Chen's interest seemed genuinely driven by care for her patient. "Your cellular structure is fascinating," Dr. Chen said one morning during Lyra's weekly checkup. "The way your bioluminescent markers interact with your nervous system is unlike anything I've seen in xenobiology." Lyra shifted uncomfortably on the examination table. "The markers are meant to facilitate crystal matrix bonding. But mine are defective." Dr. Chen's dark eyes narrowed. "According to whom?" "The Imperial Medical Council declared me non-viable for matrix bonding when I was 12. The memory still stung. They said my markers were malformed, making me incapable of both crystal synthesis and reproduction." The doctor's fingers flew across her holographic display, scrolling through data. "That's interesting, because I'm not seeing any malformation. Your markers appear to be perfectly healthy, just different." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "Different how?" "They operate on a slightly different frequency than what's listed in our Aetherian medical database." Dr. Chen looked up, her expression thoughtful. "It's like, imagine a radio trying to pick up a signal on the wrong channel. The signal exists, it's strong, but if you're not tuned to the right frequency, you'd think there was nothing there." The implications hit Lyra like a gravitational wave. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying someone deliberately misdiagnosed you." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "And I'd bet my medical license that your reproductive system is just as healthy as your markers." Lyra's markings flared bright with shock, illuminating the medical bay in pulses of blue light. Her mind raced through years of memories. The disappointed looks, the whispered conversations, the political maneuvering that had led to her exile. It hadn't been an accident. It had been orchestrated. Commander Hayes, James, found her hours later in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, offering silent support. "Dr. Chen told me about her findings," he finally said. Lyra's markings flickered dimly. "My whole life was built on a lie. Everything I believed about myself was what they wanted you to believe," James finished. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" She turned to look at him, really look at him. Over the past weeks, she'd come to appreciate the strength in his features, the kindness in his eyes. He didn't look at her with pity, but with respect, something she'd never had from her own people. "I want to understand why," she said. "Why would the medical council deliberately misdiagnose an imperial princess?" James's expression hardened. "I think I might have an idea. Our intelligence suggests there's been growing unrest in the Aetherian Empire, a faction that believes your people have become too isolated, too dependent on the crystal matrices." "The Reformation movement," Lyra whispered. She'd heard whispers of them in the palace. "They advocate for genetic diversity, for exploration beyond our crystal cities. And what better way to discredit their arguments than to make an example of a princess who was defective?" James's voice carried an edge of anger. "By declaring you unfit, they strengthened the traditional power structure." Lyra's markings pulsed with growing anger. "They used me. My father must have known." "Which means giving you to us wasn't just about getting rid of a problem," James concluded. "It was about maintaining their narrative." A bitter laugh escaped Lyra's throat. But they made a mistake, didn't they? They gave me to the one species in the galaxy known for questioning everything, for refusing to accept limitations. James smiled, a fierce expression that made her heart race. That's not their only mistake. They also assumed you'd be broken by their rejection. Instead, they set me free. Lyra's markings blazed with newfound determination. I want to know everything, James. Everything Dr. Chen can tell me about my biology. Everything your intelligence knows about the Reformation movement. No more accepting what I'm told. No more playing the role they created for me. He nodded, understanding the weight of her decision. It won't be easy. If what we suspect is true, there are powerful people who won't want these secrets exposed. Lyra thought of her father's cold dismissal, of years spent believing she was worthless. Her markings stabilized into a steadied, determined glow. Good thing I'm not alone anymore. James reached out, hesitating for just a moment before taking her hand. Her markings sparkled at the contact, creating dancing patterns of light between them. No, he agreed softly, you're not alone at all. The emergency alert jolted Lyra from her meditation. She'd been practicing connecting with the small crystal sample Dr. Chen had synthesized, trying to understand her own abilities without the weight of imperial expectations. The crystal hummed in response to her markings, proving what she now knew. She wasn't defective, just different. All senior staff to the bridge immediately. James's voice echoed through the ship's comm system. There was an edge to his tone that made her markings pulse with concern. When Lyra arrived at the bridge, the tension was palpable. James stood at the tactical display, his expression grim. Dr. Chen was already there, along with Lieutenant Rodriguez, the ship's security chief. We've intercepted a communication from the Aetherian capital, James announced without preamble. They know. Lyra's markings flickered. About my diagnosis. About everything. He activated the display, showing a complex network of intercepted communications. The Reformation movement has grown stronger. They're using the truth about your condition as a rallying cry. Your father's government is facing serious internal pressure. Dr. Chen stepped forward. They're claiming the traditional power structure deliberately suppresses genetic diversity to maintain control over the crystal matrices. Which is exactly what they did to me, Lyra said softly. The revelation still stung, but the pain had transformed into something harder, sharper. There's more, James continued. We've detected increased military activity along the border. The Aetherian fleet is mobilizing. Lieutenant Rodriguez crossed her arms. They wouldn't dare attack a Federation vessel. It would be an act of war. They might if they're desperate enough, Lyra countered. My father's legitimacy is tied to the purity of the royal bloodline. If word spreads that he participated in discrediting his own daughter to suppress political dissent, he'd rather risk war than lose control. James finished, his jaw tight with tension. The tactical display suddenly flared with new data. Multiple Aetherian warships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of their sensor range. Their crystal-powered weapon systems were charging. Battle stations, James ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as crew members rushed to their positions. Lyra's markings pulsed with anxiety. James, I should leave. Take a shuttle, turn myself in. I'm not worth starting a war over. He turned to her, his eyes fierce. You're worth fighting for, Lyra. And not just to me. Your story represents hope for change, both for the reformers and for future relations between our peoples. The Aetherians are hailing us, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. On screen, James commanded. Emperor Varian's image appeared, his own markings blazing with barely contained rage. Commander Hayes, you will return my daughter immediately. She is the property of the Aetherian Empire. No, father. Lyra stepped forward before James could respond. I am not property. I never was. You dare, her father snarled. You are nothing without your birthright, without your connection to the matrices. Lyra's markings flared brilliant blue. Dr. Chen proved your medical counsel lied. I can connect to the matrices, just differently than you wanted, just like the reformers you tried to silence. You've been corrupted by these humans, the Emperor spat. They filled your head with their chaos, their disorder. They showed me the truth, Lyra countered. They showed me that difference isn't weakness, that questioning isn't defiance. They showed me I have value beyond what you decided I was worth. James moved to stand beside her, his presence steady and strong. Princess Lyra is under the protection of the United Earth Federation. Any aggressive action against this vessel will be considered an act of war. You would risk interstellar war for one defective girl, the Emperor demanded. I would risk it to protect an innocent person from persecution, James replied firmly. I would risk it to stand against the deliberate suppression of truth, and I would risk it because Lyra has shown more courage and integrity than your entire empire. The Emperor's markings pulsed with fury. You have 1 hour to surrender her, or we will open fire. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Orders, Commander. Lieutenant Rodriguez asked. James turned to his crew, his expression resolute. Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel. Power up shields and weapons, and get me a direct line to Federation Command. James, Lyra touched his arm, her markings creating patterns of light where they connected. I won't let you sacrifice your crew for me. He covered her hand with his own. We're not sacrificing anything. We're standing up for what's right. That's what humans do. His smile held a fierce pride. Besides, your father's about to learn another human trait. We don't respond well to threats. As the crew prepared for battle, Lyra felt something shifting inside her. The last chains of her father's control were breaking. Here, among these humans who valued courage over conformity, she had found not just acceptance, but strength. The storm was rising, but for the first time in her life, Lyra was ready to face it head-on. The UES Horizon's shields hummed as the first Aetherian energy blast struck. The impact sent vibrations through the hull, but the human vessel held firm. Inside the medical bay, Lyra's markings pulsed in sync with the ship's power fluctuations as Dr. Chen ran another scan. This is impossible, Dr. Chen muttered, staring at her readings. Your markers, they're resonating with our shield frequency. Before Lyra could respond, James burst into the medical bay. Federation reinforcements are 3 hours out. We need to hold until then. He paused, noting the intense glow of Lyra's markings. What's happening? She's somehow synchronizing with our defensive systems, Dr. Chen explained. It's like her biological matrix is adapting to our technology. Another blast rocked the ship. Shields at 60%. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm. Lyra stood, her mind racing. The crystal matrices, they're not just power sources, they're amplifiers. What if? She turned to James, her markings blazing with sudden inspiration. What if I could interface with your shield generators, not to control them, but to strengthen them? That's too dangerous, James protested. We don't know what that kind of connection could do to you. My father used my supposed inability to connect with matrices to justify his oppression, Lyra said firmly. Let me use my real ability to fight back. Dr. Chen stepped forward. Commander, her markers are already naturally synchronizing. With proper monitoring, we could. Another hit. Shields at 40%. James met Lyra's determined gaze. After a moment, he nodded. Do it. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as Dr. Chen and her team set up monitoring equipment around the shield generator's access panel. Lyra placed her hands on the panel, her markings beginning to pulse with the ship's power rhythm. Remember, Dr. Chen cautioned, you're not trying to take control. Think of it like harmonizing, adding your frequency to ours. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the energy flowing through the human technology. It was different from the pure crystal matrices she trained with, more dynamic, almost alive. She let her consciousness expand, her markers reaching out to merge with the shield's frequency. The connection bloomed suddenly, filling her awareness with light and power. She could feel the shield grid, sense the points where Aetherian weapons fire tried to break through. Instinctively, she began to reinforce those points, weaving her energy into the human defenses, shield strength increasing. Rodriguez's voice was incredulous, up to 80% and climbing. On the Aetherian flagship's bridge, Emperor Varian watched in growing rage as his weapons failed to penetrate the human vessel's defenses. "Impossible," he snarled. "Their shields should be crumbling." "My Emperor," his science officer spoke hesitantly, "we're detecting an unusual energy signature. It appears to be a crystal matrix frequency, but it's merged with their shield harmonics." "Lyra," the Emperor whispered, his own markings flaring with fury. "Full power to weapons. Break through those shields." The assault intensified, but the combined human Aetherian defense held firm. Inside the Horizon's engineering section, Lyra maintained the connection, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked to adapt to each new attack pattern. James stood nearby, dividing his attention between tactical updates and Lyra's condition. "Federation ships entering the system," Rodriguez reported. 10 minutes out. "Your daughter's quite remarkable," Admiral Chen's hologram commented to James as they discussed strategy. "To bridge two completely different technologies like this, she's more than remarkable," James replied, watching Lyra work. "She's proof that progress comes from embracing difference, not suppressing it." Through their strengthened shields, they watched as the Federation fleet emerged from hyperspace, surrounding the Aetherian vessels. Admiral Chen's voice carried across all channels. "Emperor Varian, your forces are outmatched. Stand down." For a tense moment, the Aetherian weapons remained charged. Then, slowly, their power signatures began to fade. "This isn't over," Emperor Varian's transmission crackled through. "The girl belongs to us." "No," James countered, moving to stand beside Lyra as she carefully disconnected from the shield grid. "She belongs to herself, and she's just proved that your entire basis for genetic purity is flawed. She didn't just connect with our technology, she improved it." Lyra stepped forward, her markings still glowing with residual energy. "Father, your empire is built on lies. How many others have you declared defective because they were different? How many could have brought new strength to our people?" The Emperor's only response was to cut transmission. The Aetherian fleet began to retreat, their crystal-powered engines leaving trails of light in the void. Lyra swayed slightly, exhausted from the mental effort. James caught her arm, supporting her. "I think," she said with a tired smile, "we just started a revolution." "That's another human trait you've picked up," James replied softly. "We're very good at those." 6 months after the confrontation with the Aetherian fleet, Lyra stood before the Federation Council on Earth. The chamber's grand architecture reminded her of home, but here the crystalline structures were accents rather than foundations, beauty in service of function, not domination. The news from the Aetherian Empire had been constant since her father's retreat. The Reformation movement had grown from whispers to shouts, their numbers swelling as more stories like Lyra's came to light. Hundreds of defectives stepped forward, each with their own tales of suppression and exile. "The traditional power structure is crumbling," Lyra addressed the council, her markings creating subtle patterns of light in the dim chamber. "But change brings chaos, and chaos brings fear. My people need help navigating this transition." Admiral Chen, now the Federation's chief diplomat to the Aetherian crisis, nodded in agreement. "The reform leaders have requested Federation support. They want to establish a new government, one that embraces diversity rather than suppressing it. And you believe you can help with this transition?" Councillor Santos asked, leaning forward in her seat. Lyra's markings pulsed with quiet confidence. "I bridge both worlds now. Through Dr. Chen's research, we've proven that genetic diversity actually enhances our ability to work with crystal matrices. My connection with human technology during the battle wasn't an anomaly. It was a glimpse of what's possible when we stop forcing everyone to fit the same mold." James, standing at attention in his formal uniform, added, "The military implications alone are revolutionary. Combined human-Aetherian systems could change the balance of power against the swarm. But more importantly, it proves that cooperation makes us stronger than isolation." The council chambers buzzed with discussion. Finally, Council President Rice spoke. "We will support the reformation effort. Commander Hayes, your ship will lead the diplomatic mission. And Princess Lyra." She smiled. Or should I say, Ambassador Lyra. Lyra's markings flickered with surprise. James grinned beside her. Later, in the gardens outside the council building, Lyra watched Earth's sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded her of home. James found her there, his formal uniform exchanged for casual attire. "Ambassador," he said, testing the word. "It suits you. Nothing about my life has gone as expected." Lyra mused, her markings creating soft patterns in the gathering dusk. 6 months ago, I was a defective being given away as a political gift. Now I'm helping reshape my entire civilization." James took her hand, and her markings sparkled at the contact. "They always did. You were never defective, Lyra. You were just waiting for the right moment to shine." She turned to face him, her free hand resting unconsciously on her abdomen. "There's something else we need to discuss." Her markings pulsed with nervous energy. "Dr. Chen completed her latest series of tests yesterday." James's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're pregnant," Lyra confirmed. "The first human Aetherian child ever conceived. Dr. Chen says the genetic combination is stable, possibly even stronger than either parent's original genome." She paused, watching his reaction carefully. "The markers are already visible." James pulled her close, his joy evident in every line of his face. "Your father tried to write you out of history by claiming you couldn't have children. Now you're about to make history by having one." "The timing isn't ideal," Lyra worried, "with everything happening in the Empire." "On the contrary," James said softly, "it's perfect. Your child will be living proof of everything the reformers are fighting for. The strength that comes from embracing change, from letting go of artificial limitations." Lyra's markings glowed with happiness and something more, hope. "A new dawn for both our peoples. And a new family for us," James added, kissing her gently. As they stood together in the fading light, Lyra reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. Her father had given her away, thinking to rid himself of a problem. Instead, he had set in motion changes that would reshape their entire society. The humans hadn't simply accepted her. They had helped her discover her true worth, her true potential. The child growing within her would never know the weight of artificial limitations. They would grow up in a world where difference was celebrated, where change was embraced, where love crossed the boundaries of species and space. In the end, it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about fitting some predetermined mold. It was about having the courage to be yourself and finding people who would stand beside you while you did. Lyra's markings pulsed in harmony with the life growing inside her, creating patterns of light that danced in the gathering darkness. Above them, the first stars began to appear, not cold and distant as they had once seemed, but full of promise, full of possibility. A new dawn indeed.